Get ready. You're about to enter the Remso Republic.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the one, the only Remso Republic podcast. I'm your host, as always, Remso W. Martinez. Follow me on Twitter at Remso101. That's REMSO 101. And I am broadcasting to you from the one and only Commonwealth of Virginia, coast to coast, every other day. Welcome once again. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to some of our awesome networks, Player FM, Auto Radio, and the Self-Defense Radio Network. Love y'all. Hope you can tune in again and again and again as we are charging hard and forward with Season 3. We had such an amazing year with Seasons 1 and 2. It's amazing when you look back at how we started, because it was just my brother and I and a $50 donation from a friend to go buy a cheap mic. And now we're going across the country, and we have some amazing things, some amazing speaking events coming up. We have the Liberty Force comic book, which we're publishing with the Johnny Rocket Launchpad. You can go ahead and check out libertyforcecomic.com and check that out. The daily live shows are working out great. I mean, it's because you guys love this content, but I think it's also because you guys want to help us in our mission. And for new listeners, you're probably wondering, what is that mission? It's one very simple thing, but when you think about it, it's not that simple. The goal is this, folks: make freedom fun again. I'm going to say that one more time. It's making freedom fun again. What does that mean? We often, I'm just going to lump libertarians and conservatives into one giant ugly stereotype. I think we often come across cold. We're often playing catch up to the progressive left. We're often seen as the guys that don't want to do anything, the gals that are just going with the pace of things, when in fact our ideas are right. They're right because they're peaceful. They're peaceful because they look out for the individual. And they look out for the individual because if we're not having fun, if we're not living our lives to the fullest, if we're not having honest relationships where we profit from each other and where we go ahead and, lead a prosperous life that leads to prosperous communities, we're doing something wrong. And I kind of want to lead into our guest today and the topic I want to cover. You probably already know her. She probably needs no introduction, but she recently started her own brand new podcast called Government Gone Wild. I listened to the first episode a couple weeks ago, and I've been binge listening since. And she covers something which is very near and dear to my heart, because I think it's a topic that not many people really discuss. It's about wondering whether or not conservatives are the new counterculture. But before I keep going on my own, I want to go ahead and introduce her. Ladies and gentlemen, Kristin Tate. Kristin, welcome so much to the program. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to join.
Definitely. It's great to finally have you on the program. So I've got just one little conniption, because ultimately I agree with you. I believe that libertarians, conservatives, I do think that we are, we're the new punk rock in terms of what's going on in society these days. But when you look at, the grand right-wing stereotype, I mean, automatically my mind goes to CPAC. And I just think of how most of the people there have, a giant Brooks Brothers account. And when I remember the college Republicans on my college campus, I love them to death, but they reminded me, before I even met them, they reminded me of the great group of white guys going around talking about how we need freer markets and stuff like that. It just, typically, it just wasn't really that hip. And I listened to your talk with Sabo and everything, and I totally agree. It's getting to the point where it's now, we're where, I don't know, I just use punk rock as the classic example because I'm a big punk rock fan, but we're essentially moving into that territory. But I also just believe that the stereotype there just isn't really following it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I mean, it takes courage to be a conservative or a libertarian when you're a young person, because you're going against the grain, right? So having the courage to go against the grain in a public way like that automatically, in my mind, makes you the rebel. As for CPAC, I got to disagree with you there. I mean, I think recently, especially, CPAC has been changing. I mean, I was there last year, and yes, there are the nerds, the kids who are totally what you would think of as Republicans 10 years ago. But a lot of the young people there are not these like nerdy kids with Brooks Brothers accounts. A lot of them are, normal young millennials who don't really care about the social issues. They're not Bible thumpers. They just want smaller government. And I do see that shift in culture, even at places like CPAC. So I am seeing a change. And I do think just having the very courage to come out as a conservative or a libertarian in groups, social groups of young people, makes you the de facto rebel and punk, I guess you would say, even if your style doesn't necessarily line up with that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. But just kind of rewinding a moment, when you think of the societal pressure against people that have these liberty ideas, I mean, for me, I just remember high school. It wasn't necessarily the students that were all just flaming progressives. If you didn't vote for Obama, you were a racist and everything. But I remember a lot of it coming from the teachers. And I'm just trying to figure out, for most of our history, we were a very, very conservative country. I'd even argue for the most part, despite how things may appear, we are still a very conservative country. So when did kind of this ousting of everything that, for the most part is true, this ousting of conservative principles, this ousting of libertarian ideas occur? Because it couldn't have been something that just happened within the past 10, 15 years or so. It's got to be something that's been going on longer than that. Where do you think the root of it is?
Oh, yeah. I mean, our education system has always been liberal, and that's because it's funded by the government. I mean, you wonder why high school teachers are liberal. That's because they're on the government payroll. Of course, they don't want smaller government. Of course, they don't want to downsize federal spending because that's how they make their living. And I don't think a lot of them are conscious of that, but I think that's why they tend to be more left-leaning. As for secondary education, of course, that's also always been progressive. And that's because the folks who work in these institutions, they don't know how the real world works. Most of them have been in academia their entire lives. Academia does not really work like the free market. In the free market and in the real world, there's not a whole lot of demand for like gender studies PhDs or art history master's graduates. But the academia world does not have to deal with realism the same way that we all do when we graduate and we go into the real world. So I think that you're right. The country, the real people working and paying taxes in this country are largely conservative, but academia does not line up with, that conservatism. And that's why we're breeding this generation of liberal sheep bots, because they are literally being indoctrinated from, junior high through high school, through college, until the second they get their diplomas. I mean, even the commencement speakers at most of these colleges are indoctrinating the students. You have people like Elizabeth Warren, who's been giving a handful of graduation speeches just this year, basically making political stump speeches to these poor kids at their graduations. I mean, literally, they are being indoctrinated until the second they are handed their diploma. And then they get out in the real world, and it's a big slap of reality. And that's when most kids realize, hey, maybe smaller government isn't such a bad thing. But for those students who have the courage and actually do the digging and the reading and, try to understand politics before they get that hard slap of reality, for those kids who do come out as libertarians or conservatives before they graduate, they're often ostracized. It's not easy for those kids. I know, because I went to a very liberal college. And
it's
that's
rough.
why I think, it's very rough, and it takes a lot of guts. So if you're the kind of person who has the guts to do that, hey, you got to get props for that. And that's why I think we're starting to see this kind of like counterculture, because you really are kind of a badass if you are able to say, hey, I don't agree with, whatever the sheep bots believe, and risk your social standing. I mean, that's really what a rebel is. Being a rebel isn't just going along with the masses. That's easy.
Exactly. We're going to go ahead and keep this conversation going, but first, we're going to go ahead and hit our first commercial break. Folks, you're listening to the Remso Republic. Hang on tight. We'll be back in a moment.
The voice of the Liberty Generation, Remso W. Martinez.
Take
the show on the go by subscribing to the Remso Republic on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, and YouTube. Don't be left out.
Hey everyone, the Johnny Rocket Launchpad is Liberty. Each week we strive to bring you the best guests in talk radio. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad delivers weekly interviews of noteworthy politicians, experts, and activists. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is bringing the party to the Libertarian Party and launching ideas in your direction. Check us out at johnnyrocketlaunchpad.com. You can hear me, Kurt Nelson, and the beautiful Heather Nixon talk about the ideas of liberty, rock and roll.
Hey guys, Tim Preuss here, and I wanted to take a minute and invite you to stop over to PreussPodcast.com and give our show a listen. We've got in-depth commentary on the issues that matter to you.
These hookers, fucking whores, are out there.
These hookers, man, I tell you.
Yeah, that's like the most contact I've had with the hooker. Is
them yelling at you.
Them yelling at me on Twitter.
We break down the most pressing issues of our time.
This large lady with like tight clothing on. Not appropriately linked to tight clothing either.
And we get the most intelligent analysis from friends of ours like Jeffrey Tucker.
We pulled over engine trouble, and what happened? What happened? I don't know. Oh God!
Seriously though, we love putting on a show that both entertains and educates. We're growing, and we'd be thrilled if you joined us. Check out PreussPodcast.com for more. That's PREUSS podcast.com.
Make sure to visit libertarianwingmedia.com, where you can find articles written by libertarians all over the world on all of today's issues. Check out our podcast network with monthly and weekly podcasts. Check out our libertarian t-shirt store with t-shirts like Make Markets Free Again and Make Markets Not War. And you too can become an author at Libertarian Wing Media and write what you want when you want. Just email alexmerced@alexmerced.com. Thank you very much.
Folks, welcome back from the first commercial break. We're going to go ahead and continue our conversation from earlier, but first I want to go ahead and just pivot a little bit. So some of, just talking about things from a purely entertainment standpoint, some of my favorite candidates from the 2016 election, just from an entertainment perspective, were Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Donald Trump, and John McAfee, because they were just doing things that you just don't do. Rand Paul is going out and he's shredding and lighting the tax code on fire. Donald Trump is being Donald Trump. I see posters all around town of freaking Ted Cruz tatted down like Tupac, and then John McAfee is just doing what John McAfee does, just completely shocking everyone. And ultimately, he was a fair runner-up in the Libertarian presidential primaries. So in terms of going forward, those guys still have the lasting impact. I mean, Gary Johnson ran away, but you look at guys like Austin Peterson and John McAfee, and they're still here doing stuff. They're still pushing for the cause in some way, shape, or form. And same goes for Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. They didn't just lie down and let the Republican establishment do everything they wanted. They're still going out and speaking truth and ultimately doing the right thing. So in terms of just, how do we get people to pay attention? How do we get people to listen? But how do we get people to become inspired and get engaged? Do you think we need more of like these edgier politicians? Do you think we need more of these hardcore activists or something else? Because obviously the day and age in which a person like Jeb Bush could be elected, in a larger stage like that, it's just not going to happen. It could. I could be absolutely wrong, but I see that wing of things just being completely dead at this point.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's the ideology that's dead, although I do think Jeb Bush's, ideology, the establishment GOP ideology is dying. I think it's a messaging thing. I think messaging is always more important than the message itself. And yeah, the candidates like Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, these candidates who speak in a way that's easy to understand, exciting to listen to, they portray elements of themselves that makes it easy to connect to them. All of this is very effective communication, especially for young people. Young people are sick of hearing scripted, politicians in suits who don't really seem human, these robots, basically. So I think what you're referring to is really a communications issue and not really an ideology issue. I think at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders supporters and Trump supporters actually have a lot in common when it comes to ideology. But what really kind of bonds those two groups is the way that their leaders communicated. I mean, Bernie Sanders and Trump have so much in common when it comes to communication. And moving forward, if candidates on both sides of the aisle want to tap into the massive millennial voter pool, they have got to find ways of communicating policy that's not boring, that's uplifting, not depressing, but inspiring and fun.
Even if that ultimately includes lying to the people they're trying to get on their side, because with Bernie Sanders, I mean, every free thing he wants to give out has to be stolen from somebody else. I mean, he keeps giving out this idea of, oh, tuition free, free healthcare, free this. Ultimately, yeah, he comes off inspiring, he comes off passionate, but ultimately he's being a giant bogus liar.
Oh, yeah, his ideas would be extremely devastating, but this is what kind of scares me about our political system, but that doesn't even matter. He was able to rally so many young people based off of his stupid ideas because he was so good at communication. So if the right wants to beat the left, we have got to get better at communication. Otherwise, yeah, these idiot liberals with these horrible ideas will keep getting votes because honestly, the truth really doesn't matter. It's just about who's the best communicator. That really is the most important factor in politics. It's depressing, but hey, if we want to get the good policies out there, we need our guys to get better at communication. The Jeb Bushes, the Marco Rubios, those guys are not going to win.
Exactly, and I absolutely agree. But, you know, just kind of like zeroing in on Bernie Sanders because I like to pick on him. I will say this. I agree with everything you mentioned just now. But the thing I just don't understand, and it's not just in terms of like the Democrats. I know he's an independent, but let's just lump him into that category. One of the races I've been looking at recently is the race going on in Texas right now, where you've got Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who's a younger guy. He's a former punk rock guy, I guess. I don't know if he ever made anything that we've heard of, but I mean, that's his claim to fame. So you've got him, and he's going around doing these Facebook live streams of events where he's just cursing at the crowd and everything else. And he's trying to get them to get all riled up and start chanting, get rid of Ted and stuff. So you've got that on one end. And then you've got old man Sanders, who's decrepit. He looks like a communist. And I'm still trying to understand. How is it you've got this younger guy who, for the most part, when you look at it from an electability standpoint, that's the kind of like Kennedy-esque type of cutout of a candidate you want. And he's doing, quote, good, I guess, right now amongst Democrats. But I never see him getting onto like the Sanders caliber of fame and influence. So
yeah,
why do you think
not.
old man Bernie was able to actually get so many people around our age to jump out and like go, you know, complete bananas for that guy?
Well, I don't actually think age or looks matter very much when you're talking about like
but let's
who's
just
a
admit,
badass.
Bernie just looks like he's going to like, I don't know, you know, bite me like a vampire.
I honestly think that actually helps Bernie. You know, what Bernie had going for him was that he was so authentic. People thought he was so damn authentic. The fact that he was like this old man from Vermont, I think really helped him. You know, people are very suspicious of people who are too good looking in suits and just appear scripted and kind of, I don't know how to really say this, but like look
very
at Ron
photogenic
Paul.
people.
Yeah, like look at Ron Paul. He had the same kind of movement going on the right. Another really old man who was kind of like kooky, but he was so damn authentic. And the fact that both Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul were super old, I think only helped their cause. Look at Marco Rubio. He was an incredibly good speaker, very good looking and young people didn't vote for him. They want authenticity more than anything. That matters more than looks. I think it matters more than any of the other factors.
That is really interesting because when you look at like, I don't know, I'm going to call it the millennial stereotype. People think we're very artificial. People think that we're very vain. I mean, you bring up the Kardashian syndrome and everything. That's typically what comes up. So the fact that, you know, you bring up, and I do agree that they're just incredibly authentic, that does say something. Do you think, I don't know, is there anyone that comes to your mind that actually is able to pull that type of authenticity when it comes to people? Because I hear a lot of people complain that that's the difference between Rand Paul and Ron Paul, that Ron was able to jump into
and
that
I agree
grandfather authenticity, and Rand just wasn't able to.
And I agree with that. Yeah, Ron Paul is a great example of someone on the right who has that authentic way about him. I think Donald Trump, I don't know, we're going to see if he actually is authentic, but he's very good at communicating in a way that makes people believe he is authentic. Well, time will tell whether or not he is, but I think he's another great example of someone who really, really did a great job at least convincing people that he's authentic and different and fresh. Other than those two, there's really no emerging stars, at least on the right, who I can think of that have really captured that way of being. And that freaks me out, because if conservatives and libertarians can't find people like that, they're going to lose elections. The left has a bunch of these people like Liz Warren. I can't stand Elizabeth Warren, but the left loves her again because she seems like one of these authentic, politicians of the people, even though she's a total hypocrite millionaire who, lied about being an Indian. None of that matters because people think she's so authentic. They have the Castro brothers, these young twin brothers from Texas. They're Hispanic. They're amazing communicators. And again, they come off as politicians of the people. This is what people want these days. Communication, authenticity, all of this, unfortunately, kind of trumps policy and ideology. So if conservatives can't step up to the plate with new, fresh voices who can convey this kind of authenticity, they will lose elections, in my opinion.
Very true. We're going to go ahead and hit our final commercial break. Folks, don't tune away. We'll be back in a moment. Hang on tight.
Let's make freedom fun again.
Stay up to date with the latest news and updates by visiting remzorepublic.com.
Make sure to subscribe to all the podcasts on the Libertarian Wing Media Podcast Network on Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher, such as the Alex Merced Cast, with interesting interviews with interesting people every week. Breaking Progressives, spending time every week breaking down left-wing narratives and showing what's real and what's fake. Economics Why Not, a weekly look at economics and applying economic principles to daily life. Better Today, a weekly podcast where we take a look on ways to improve your life and be better today. Libertarian Comments is a podcast where we play audio from the video archives of Alex Merced from his videos dating back to 2008. Liberty Public Access, a podcast where anyone can submit an episode. Submit your episodes to Alex Merced at alexmerced.com. Have you been wanting to start your own podcast? Then subscribe to Podcast and Blogging Tips and Tricks, a weekly podcast about how to host your podcast, how to produce your podcast, and how to market your podcast. We'll be adding some monthly podcasts to the lineup soon, including Make Markets Free Again, a monthly look at what's going on in markets and regulation all over the world, and the Free VST podcast, looking at free VST instruments for electronic music producers. Listen to these podcasts by going to libertarianwingmedia.com or subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends and leave a positive review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.
Are you looking for a podcast that represents life, liberty, and free movement of ideas? Well, look no further. The Classical Liberal Podcast is here for free speech and the latest in American politics. Come tune in for liberty with Alex Shaw at theclassicalliberal.weebly.com. That's classicalliberal.weebly.com. All right, everyone, welcome back to the final segment. We've got a few extra minutes of the show, so I just kind of want to, draw everything together. When I was working for Congressman Tom Garrett, when I was in the Danville, Virginia office, I remember watching the I think it was Fox or CNN, which was on the giant TV screen in the office. And everything was showing that Hillary Clinton was going to win. I remember a few days before I had done my, predict it electoral map, and I showed her getting above 300 because it just everything you could have done to kill a campaign at that point had been happening. And in Virginia, not many people know this, but Trump actually pulled out 3 weeks before the general election in Virginia. It was the state Republican Party that was putting up all the Trump signs and everything else. It was a bunch of PACs that were coming in. He had basically given up on Virginia, which is why I think he lost it. But I remember I'm watching the screen, and a gentleman comes over to me, and he's he's been a truck driver. He's a blue collar guy, and he looks at me and he's like, "How do you think this is going to go?" And I say, "Man, we might win our congressional race, but we are not taking back the White House." And he looks at me and he said, "Well, I think he's going to win." And I look at him, and it's like, "Okay, what backs up that claim?" And he's like, "It's just a feeling." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I feel a lot of things too. It doesn't make it right." And he looks at me, he's like, "Trump loves people." And I look at him and I'm just like, are you serious? He's like, "Trump loves people. And I think there are a lot of people out there that he's connected with that are just quiet right now. And tonight at the polls, he's going to win." And I said, "Okay, bud, that works out." Ultimately, we see how things happened. But that does show me one thing. And it stays in my mind to this day. I think Trump loves people. That's what this gentleman said. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing, and we've covered this a little bit in the prior segments, but it kind of comes down to this. We've talked about people being authentic. We talked about people connecting with other voters and their constituency. I think we're entering, and this is not unique to Trump, but I think we're definitely entering the age of the strongman leader. I don't think Obama had that per se. When people think of Obama, they did not think of someone that's going to stand up to the bad guys and stand up to all these people. If anything, he was a bit of a bitch this last 8 years. He had the IRS and a bunch of other people do his dirty work for him. But when it comes to Trump, he goes after them himself. He goes on Twitter. He has Sean Spicer call them out, and then he'll come out from behind anywhere and just call them out. That's a really terrifying thing. So my question is this. I know this is kind of broad, but going forward, I think this is a good time for liberty. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of things that scare me. Where do you see things going from here in our electoral politics?
I think you're right. I think politics is increasingly becoming about personalities. I sort of disagree on your fighter theory. I don't necessarily think that the fact that Trump was a fighter is solely why he won. And I don't think that future people who get elected will necessarily have that quality about them. I think it's more about captivating personalities. Yeah, Obama was not necessarily like this strongman fighter, but he had a captivating personality. People loved him. He seemed like a good guy. And he had that, again, authentic quality about him. He really did. I don't like Obama's policies, but I actually think he's probably a nice person. So I think going forward, politics is going to be about a few things. One, authenticity, which we talked about. Two, personality. Who is this candidate as a person? Does this seem like someone who, as you mentioned, likes people? Three, and I think honestly, the least important of the three is policy and ideology. Obviously, conservatives have a harder time selling their policies because they're more negative, cut taxes, limit government, than liberals, they have an easier time selling their policies as positive. Like, we want to give you things, free education, free healthcare. It's much easier to package and sell those policies. So I think it's going to be about personality, likability, authenticity, and policy, least importantly. So we'll see what happens moving forward. I really genuinely hope that conservatives and libertarians can find some candidates who are good at communication, because we have the right ideas, we have the right policies, but if we cannot package and sell those ideas effectively, we won't win elections.
Exactly. So when are we going to see you run for president?
I want nothing to do with politics. I hate DC, so probably not anytime soon.
We got it on the record, folks. She said no. Okay. If people want to check out your show and everything else and support you on Patreon and stuff, how can they do so?
So my show is called Government Gone Wild. It's on iTunes, and I have a Patreon page. It's under the same name, Government Gone Wild. And then people can find me on Twitter as well. My handle is Kristin B. Tate.
Awesome. Kristin, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you again.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Love your show.
Appreciate it. So, folks, to kind of wrap things up, I know a lot of people out there that genuinely care about their community. And they're people that can connect with their neighbor. They can get their friends to rally around them for something. They're genuinely good people that can connect with others. But the biggest thing is they have integrity. I'm not saying, everyone in DC has no integrity. I know a handful. But for the most part, I think that more people need to be courageous and step up to the bat and say, hey, I'm going to raise my hand, I'm going to jump in this, and I'm going to help myself, my family, and my community. Hopefully, you can do that, especially those people who are good communicators. But most importantly, they're good people with leadership. But what's one thing you could do if you want to go ahead and spread that message? Go ahead and like us on Facebook at Remso W. Martinez and leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Help spread the message. Go ahead and check us out on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the Self-Defense Radio Network, Auto Radio, and Liberty.me Studio. And if you can't find the platform or network that suits your daily life, go ahead and check us out at remsorepublic.com/podcast. As always, be good to your neighbor. Go out and treat yourself. And tune in next week. I'm Remso Martinez, America. Good night.
Stay connected to Liberty's Rabble Rouser on Facebook and Twitter to stay up to date with the latest episodes, blogs, and other available content. What are you waiting for?